Hello and welcome to Insight Live, the IT Experts Take. Today we're going to be talking about simplifying the workplace with SASE. And we've got some fantastic experts and a guest with us today. We would love to welcome Simone Gameri, who handles go-to-market for SASE products for Palo Alto. Welcome, sir.
Thank you for having me.
And we also have with us JJ Safer, Practice Development Manager, and Mike Moore, who's our Senior Manager for Portfolio Development here at Insight. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So, man, it's going to be really hard for me not to joke about SASE. It's just my thing. But I'm a little sassy. So, but I think, so welcome everybody. We're glad to have you with us. And those of you who follow us know that we've talked about SASE before. We thought it was a good time to kind of get back into the topic and refresh. There's been some additional features that have been added since this product or for the designation first came out, if you will. And obviously having somebody from Palo here who's an expert in this field to help us with the conversation is going to be pretty exciting. So, we know we have a lot of listeners out there that are kind of coming in, some from a business perspective, some from a tech perspective, but we like to kind of lay the framework of the thing that we're talking about. So let's, for the uninitiated, somebody take a shot at explaining what SASE is.
I'll go first, and then you guys can chime in. How's that sound? All right. So as you mentioned, we talked about this. It was probably a year and a half ago, had a session on SASE, and to your point, things have changed a little bit. But I mean, in its simplest form, it's really moving our cloud security feature set. You've probably heard of the Security Services Edge to the cloud. And introducing some of the networking features like software-defined WAN to get that optimized connectivity for our users to our applications, regardless of where those users are connecting from. So really, it's that convergence in a cloud-delivered model for our network and security feature sets all coming together in one nice place for us.
Nice. And anybody want to take a stab at? So for people who think that's awesome, what is it replacing? What would people be familiar with if before they had SASE in their environment?
Well, I'll go.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting. So the term SASE, I think it was Gartner that came up with it in like 2019 or something. And it is kind of what you alluded to, Jason, earlier. I mean, it's really a term in that it's descriptive of a lot of other parts and pieces, of other security solutions. And since then, there's been a lot of changing, in terms of functionality, a lot of consolidation, vendor consolidation, as well as functional technology consolidation in there. And so, I mean, you've got in there, if it was then or now, it'll change certainly a little bit, especially when ZTNA kind of gets dropped in there. But we've got SD-WAN is in there, CASB is in there, firewall as a service. Is in there, secure web gateway is in there, and then zero trust, which is it in of itself, is almost another SASE discussion in terms of what that can, what the borders of that kind of solution are. So yeah, that's most of what's in there, at least for now.
Yeah, and I mean, just to tie on and really add to that, Jason, I mean, looking at traditional network architectures where we used to be able to draw a really nice box around, this is our inside network, this is our outside. We had a pipe to the internet to access all of our internet-bound applications. So really, if you think about how we had that set up before, we had a robust firewall sitting there, typically in a DMZ. So we had an inside and an outside, and all those services JJ's talking about, the cloud access security broker, intrusion prevention, intrusion detection, the firewalling capabilities, data loss prevention, those all sat in a suite of security services within that centralized location, typically in a data center. And really what we're seeing is with more and more applications moving to the cloud, more adoption of SaaS, hybrid cloud infrastructures, and especially the influx of work from home that we've seen over the past couple of years, it was just really inefficient to have that centralized model. So we're seeing a little bit more replacement for that feature set, especially as we see people trying to adopt DIA, direct internet access across multiple locations at their offices, trying to support remote workers and provide that suite of services, regardless of where those users are, and having that centralized functionality be really the bottleneck to to the security and networking solutions for our clients.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Simone, are they getting it right? You're the expert, right?
I was actually nodding vehemently with what I was hearing. Ultimately, you're right. I think, Mike, you mentioned, right? SASE definition is relatively recent, and there's been a lot of debate around what should be included, shouldn't be included. I think the whole notion of networking and security convergence is, resonates. We are seeing that in the market, both with our customers and partners, and how they are reorchestrating their architecture, and they're doing that. The part that perhaps we haven't touched upon yet is two angles. One is, I think SASE somewhat removes the concept of location, right? And removes the concept of location both for where applications sit and for where users connect from, and creates the ability to deliver a secure connection between user and application, no matter where either of those are, and no matter what the connection modality is between the two. The other aspect of that, and that's how I like to talk about SASE, is not just security, it's not just networking, it's also a user experience that is common across the two. And the way I like to describe this is in an environment where users, are transient, they move around, even more so now with return to office, right, after the pandemic. And, they expect to be as productive as they are in the office when they are at home or when they're sitting at the cafe of choice. What we need to make sure is that security never gets in the way of productivity. Because in general, like my personal experience has been, when that happens, security loses. And that's what you want to avoid. I think that's the critical aspect also of SASE, is that it delivers security and networking everywhere, maintaining the same user experience throughout. So that's just maybe a couple of additions that I like to bring to the table. I love your thoughts.
Oh, I like those. And I agree. And being a CISO of a Fortune 500 organization, security can't lose. We've got to have security on there. And what I think is interesting about kind of the convergence, I remember when we first started saying SASE, first of all, I didn't like it. I didn't like the way it just didn't sound right to me. But we also didn't think, security sometimes sits at a certain portion of an organization. The WAN portion sits in a side of the organization, the identity portion that needs to take place. There are all these different sides that have to converge from the way that the solution has to come together. And I think that might have been what, even though the tech was really strong to begin with, I think it kind of took a little bit of time for everybody to kind of catch up for how operationally to tackle this. Does that sound fair to everybody?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I mean, as we look at software-defined WAN as an example, I mean, we've been talking about SD-WAN for years, and we're just starting to see a lot more adoption in that space, and bigger companies tackling these because they see the benefits of it. But we always have that challenge with security. So when we start talking about having direct internet access and breakouts like that, and I talked about that DMZ at the data center, if you're trying to replicate that across multiple branches, it just becomes ultimately cost ineffective. So when SASE, or actually the security services edge, so just the cloud security portion of that, started becoming more prevalent, and then we started getting integrations between the SD-WAN platforms like we have with our friends at Palo Alto, you start getting the best of both worlds, where you can provide that security regardless of the location, whether it's your branch locations or your users, but also start getting that optimized connectivity. So in addition to that, now that we're seeing them come together kind of in a single vendor approach, which a lot of our clients go for. Obviously, you can piece things together. It just gives you another pane of glass that you have to manage and correlate or integrate together. But as that's coming together, we have role-based access control that comes into play, where we can have network teams, security teams coming into the same console, where security can be monitoring logs and setting policies, where the networking teams can be worried about what IP addresses do I need to connect from my branch locations, what tunnels do I need to spin up, and then how am I connecting all these users? And then the other piece that I'm sure we'll get to is all the visibility that comes on top of that both of the network and security need to really provide support for our users to make sure they are getting those optimized experiences, but also to make sure that everybody's secure and they're only accessing the data and resources they need to.
Oh, that's awesome. And I think that visibility is key. I mean, you don't get that until you get that convergence. Well, you get it, you just have to cobble it together. And I think it's really important to get that visibility into your 100%. Operational aspects.
100%. I think you know, if I can chime in on that, it's also giving that visibility, getting the visibility, and then bringing tools in the hands of the user. It's also what prevents that dichotomy to strike between user experience and security. You actually give them the tools to self-remediation, any type of performance degradation they may have been experiencing. If you don't have the visibility, if you don't unable to break it down for them and give them the tools to act on it, or give the IT teams then the opportunity to get to a time to resolution that is fast enough, then that's when bad outcomes happen from a security standpoint. 100%, I completely agree.
And I think I made this comment earlier, actually not even related to this, but not a lot of people in my mind, I don't imagine that people are calling up going, hey, I need to get some SASE. It's driven, but to your point, Simone, I think, the user experience, but it's not the users who are usually demanding this, right? So where do we feel that comes? And I think, depending on whether it's security or the infrastructure side, where's the need or the desire coming in? Because this is something from a leadership perspective in an organization could be potentially abstract to them.
Yeah. I can give you my perspective. I love folks to share theirs. I see 4 major projects typically that are coming about. One we have seen plenty of, especially 2 years ago, tremendous acceleration. It's just like a pure basic VPN replacement. So instead of as applications move to the cloud, it's like, how do I prevent airpinning all the traffic back to a data center to go up, right? That was the basic private app access use case. It still is pretty prevalent, and it's a clear use case. The second one, which is as evident, is internet access. And I use internet loosely because I put SaaS apps that are not private SaaS apps in there as well, for the same reason. You want to secure that, you don't want to just secure only the traffic goes to your private application. You want to make sure all the traffic is secure no matter where the user is. So that's the second use case that clearly drives it. And the third use case is actually like a complementary use case to both, which tends to be around the advanced data security. And I put in there everything that basically stops short of securing the workload. It's basically securing access to those applications and the data behind those applications, not just the data that is in transit, it's also the data that frankly lives in the cloud and never leaves the cloud. I think about collaboration tools, right, where you are sending messages and files around, and really data never leaves that application, right? And so that's the third project. It's kind of the advanced SaaS and data security. And then the fourth one that kind of like straddles them all, but brings it into the branch environments, like the secure branch connectivity. And it's some of it is driven by, as you were saying, Mike, I think SD-WAN type of projects, so basic connectivity. But more and more often, we are seeing this concept of an elastic branch that is needed. And if you think about the explosion of video that we have had through the pandemic, that's brought now back into the work environment. So the requirements for bandwidths are through the roof. And when you're back in the office 3 days a week, and your demand for bandwidth are spiky as well. And so, part of it is, one is elasticity, and then two is security. And when it comes to the branch, I'd say you push in security, not just tied to the user connecting to application, but actually for things connecting to applications. Think about the many headless devices that are sitting in branches. And so IoT security starts becoming very prevalent as part of that conversation. Those are the 4 use cases I see. And more often than not now, you're seeing customers actually looking at it, which is a sense of maturity of the market. We get it that's all together. It's not like, we're looking for a full SASE project, but it's still very prevalent. They're just tackling one at a time, even in those cases. I don't know if that's what you guys are experiencing as well. I love your take.
Yeah, definitely. And to touch on a couple of those use cases, the VPN replacement use case, that was pretty prevalent in the past couple of years, especially with the pandemic when everybody shifted work from home. When we start looking at cloud delivered solutions, you're getting all the benefits of cloud scale and resiliency. So, we've got providers like Paulo that are sitting in the cloud that run on top of AWS, GCP, or adjacent to the clouds. So we're actually providing optimized connectivity, lower latency, better user experience for our workforce, regardless of where they sit. But we're also getting that security at cloud scale. So a really quick way to scale up the workforce, especially since it's basically a subscription. It's a SaaS offering itself. So you're paying by the seat to get that type of connectivity and all the great on-prem security services you were getting through your VPN, with the benefit of not having to kind of hairpin that traffic going back to the data center and then back out to SaaS. And in addition to that, people always argument, well, VPN, you can do split tunneling. Yeah, yes, you can break out internet traffic to not go over your VPN tunnel, go straight to the internet. But then that comes back to that visibility conversation. Once you shoot that out of the tunnel, you lose all visibility to what your workforce is going to. And that's something that we can mitigate by moving to a SASE solution.
Plus, what SASE does, it kind of deals with the reasons you would split tunnel for the most part anyway.
Right.
So I think that I like the kind of continuum that you talked about, because that connectivity, that VPN solution was what kind of drove everybody there. But I think, when we get to those advanced data protection capabilities, that's, something you couldn't get to without having something like this. And I think maturity wise, I think people probably have yet to take advantage of some of those more advanced capabilities because, organizationally, they're working up to that. I see it in a lot of very large organizations, especially after we're still trying to adjust from a remote workforce or not, 3 days a week kind of thing. There's still a lot of operational aspects, but I think what excites me from a security perspective is getting to those very, specific profiles that we can get to control devices and users to a very specific degree that you wouldn't get with those technologies prior to them being converged from a SASE perspective.
Yeah, right. No doubt. And since we've got, at least certain, since this thing lives in the cloud and you get the benefits, of that, it opens a door to, when we're talking about that legacy VPN scenario, you've got a capacity issue twofold there. One is simply the bandwidth, itself, when you have to hairpin that, especially when you're talking about your user load doing this, whether they're in the office or remote, but the other piece, and sometimes this is overlooked, is the capacity that you get by having the elastic cloud environment. And that is just simply SSL decryption. So nowadays, way back when, not way back when, but it's slowly been climbing with how much of our traffic is encrypted. And when it's encrypted, it cannot be inspected. You can get some details about the source and destination and such, but you can't actually look at the traffic itself. And when you're actually going into these hardware appliances that probably weren't even spec'd at the time to handle the load for, a VPN solution when everybody automatically leaves the office, that's probably undoable. And, you're looking at between 40 to 60 to sometimes 80% of traffic is now encrypted, which means that's like an any rule, at least from a threat perspective. And when you can take that and just send it straight to the cloud, the hardware limitations disappear. That literally completely goes away. So, you've got capacity from a user experience perspective, sure, in that, you've got all the bandwidth that you possibly could ever want and need, but you also get a lot of other functionality, SSL decryption being a staple and a hugely important one, but I mean, you just got it. You automatically get the resources available to do that in your organization if you couldn't have even done it before. So it's something that is very, very, very often overlooked.
Yeah, and that's what strengthens your zero trust posture then as an enterprise, right? That's part of the, I think, of the challenge and that SASE starts solving for. I mean, a lot of, I presume, the companies you work with and, a lot of companies we work with, they've been on a zero trust journey for a very long time, right? It's not like zero trust is a new concept. Now everybody likes to fill their mouths with this this concept like it's a new concept. It's not a new concept, right? It's about connecting a user to an application, right, through a device, giving them access to certain data. If you agree with that, then looking at the traffic and inspecting it, right? It's not complicated. Yeah. The part that became incredibly complicated, I think, is what JJ, you were saying, is that as traffic, user and applications started being everywhere, like then the way companies have been solving this issue has been with point solutions for the specific use case and the specific connection. And that makes it very hard for it to be zero trust, or gets you to compromises like, okay, I'm not going to decrypt this traffic and I'm just going to break it out or and not expect it. And that's where you start then leaking water from a zero trust standpoint. So that's, I think, is part of the other big benefit of SASE, is that this starts bringing together a full zero trust envelope around your architecture, your enterprise.
Oh, I love that. So we've talked about the brilliance of SASE from a conceptual perspective, right? The convergence, the visibility, the user experience, those kinds of things. But one of the things, when you brought up zero trust, that kind of gives me the shakes as well, because that's a term that is completely misused. Well, not everywhere, but it can be misused. How about that? And it's confusing to some of the folks that aren't in the tech perspective of it. But I think SASE is one of those things as well, because when we're talking about SASE, the provider also matters, right? And even I would have said this even if Paolo wasn't on the line, right? But so somebody tell me what, from a POP perspective, why that matter, why the provider matters. I would expect Simone to want to jump on.
You want me to take that? Yeah. So let me just, when it comes to zero trust, I think you need to decide which philosophy you latch on. There are like many different vendors out there. And eventually, I think you need to decide. It's almost like you can't lean in with both. I'll give you an example. Like, you either believe that you are orchestrating your network at layer 3, layer 4, or you believe your network needs to be orchestrated layer 7 from a security standpoint. If you believe that, then you're making certain choices around the type of security policy you establish, right? It's either or. You can't do, sure, if you do layer 7, you can also do layer 3 and 4, but practically, you're saying, like, that's how I define this privileged access, right? That's one aspect. You need to believe that either you are okay assuming that somebody gets trust because they've established a session with you, and then you enable that trust, or you need to be able to decide that you don't want to do that and you want to verify trust continuously. You don't just do it once at the stage establishing the connection, but continuously check the posture, right? Again, that's a philosophy. You need to believe that you're like, you swipe left or swipe right? And so that's what matters. And look, ultimately, yes, you can. The other thing you can decide is like, look, do you want to rely on vendors that have their own infrastructure and data centers, right? Or you want to rely on a network that is scalable and resilient based on multiple hyperscalers. Again, it's a philosophy. I've seen actually people leaning one way or the other, but ultimately, what I personally believe is that it's our job should be making sure that no matter what happens, you have full reliability of the service you provide. Because now you're not in a situation when SASE, you're not in a situation like you're with firewall. You can build redundancy. You can have HA pairs, and if one fails, the other one pops up. You are in line for all the traffic. So you better make sure that no matter what, including if people cut the wire in the fiber, you want to make sure that service doesn't go down for your customers. And so there's just like examples, I think, of things that matter as you're looking at different vendors. Of course, there are a ton of others, like you're looking at the single stack versus a mix and match. You're assuming complexity as a customer. You're assuming complexity comes with a risk, not just cost. It's a risk you're taking because now you're managing policies in different places. I've seen customers like actually making these decisions as we were having conversations with them. But ultimately, it's we have a certain philosophy around security, and we believe that's the right way to look at it. Again, love your take, but since you asked me specifically, I had to.
That was a very diplomatic answer, considering where your title comes from. So that was very good. Thank you.
Gentlemen? Yeah, I'll add on to that. And I won't go too far down the zero trust path unless you want to go that route, Jason. But I know we've got lots of LinkedIn lives on that, so we've already gone deep, so I won't. But talking about providers that have these options and sit in the cloud, and we're talking about best of breed and fitting things together, or going with a single solution or single vendor to kind of stitch everything together. We all know that zero trust, there is no silver bullet. It is that philosophy. It is a framework. It's going to take a whole village to come together just from a process, people, and tools perspective to really enforce zero trust within an environment. And it's going to be a continuing process. But when we're looking at the architectures that get us there, having a provider that has that single stack approach and the integrations to really correlate data, whether you're using XOR or SIEM or like the data lake on the back end to keep all that data and protecting your data at rest. There's so many different components, from the endpoint to the data, the application to the environment itself, that you want to make sure that you're looking for a provider that has integration points or visibility, at least, into each of those different aspects. And that's why we've got some strong partnerships, Simone included, on here to talk about the really cool solutions that we can do in the SASE space. But when you get into that zero trust, when you're talking SASE, really just starting to scratch the surface. JJ mentioned ZTNA a little bit earlier on in the session, but ZTNA is just one component that helps with that zero trust philosophy, really providing granular access to those applications, checking who the identity is, showing what application stacks they can get access to or they don't have access to. And same with the CASB features that are integrated into the solution as well. So tolerated apps, sanctioned apps that we're not going to allow at all in our environment, and doing that at an identity-based level so that we can get that granular access and more of that zero trust feel and approach when we're going to our cloud applications.
Now, if I can remove my objectivity for a moment. So one thing I will say is, so SASE as a term was created effectively by Gartner in 2019?
That's right. In
2017, Palo had a solution called Global Protect Cloud Services. So
we
2 years before SASE existed as a concept, Palo was actually doing it, and they did it with the virtual versions of their firewall. That's, if everybody knows, anybody that's in any way familiar with Palo, that's what they know about Palo. This is a firewall company that has expanded their portfolio, but those are the roots. They took that hardware, they virtualized it. You could buy it then, virtual, certainly, people rolling it out everywhere. But they went to the next step and took the virtual version of it, stuck it in the cloud, called it Global Protect Cloud Services, and beat SASE to SASE by 2 years. So it's a foundational security market differentiator. When you're talking about vendor selection, when there's so many parts and pieces inside the SASE solution, where those things come from, where those parts and pieces come from, and how long they've been around and been able to mature and then, integrate with the other parts and pieces is extremely important, So, everybody's going to have a short list of vendors, and everybody's trying to get that vendor list down for two reasons. One is it's costly to have more of them, but also it's costly to maintain multiple version or multi-vendor solutions. I'll set this aside for a moment. It's extremely important to take that into consideration. And one thing I'm looking at doing is kind of like a SASE buyer guide, ultimately, to really help people understand more, about what is, not only what it can do, but how is it contextually relevant to different companies and different situations. And then, obviously they'll have something then that they can do vendor selection from, at least a kind of a hot sheet.
I think you're on the hook for that, because that was what I was kind of alluding to earlier, where I think when we say SASE, it doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. But I think sometimes when people hear it, they do think. So they think that they get brand A or brand B. It's the same. Now we're just talking about price. That is not accurate in this particular case. And that was the thing. And I also think from a CISO perspective as well, when I talk to business leaders, there are some people that are vehemently against having a single platform. We don't want to make this, that's a risk being on a single platform. And that is so not the way to think these days. I mean, these days,
1980s.
Yeah, exactly. You can't get the efficiencies even, but just if you want your people in console hell having to go through all of these different things, your best of breed for 50 different products is not the way to go. And I would say that regardless of who our guest is today, it's just one of those things where, the platform play is the right play. So I think, and we're probably at time, but we've got it. Sounds like we had some more conversation here. Maybe we do this again. But what I would like, JJ, to your point, what are some things, some aspects? If we got folks out here, we've got them piqued interest. We've got folks who kind of came in on the remote access VPN kind of deal, and now they're looking to mature. What advice we'll start at JJ, then go to Mike, and we'll let Simone have the last words here. What advice would you give folks out there, maybe expounding on yours, what you just said, JJ, to folks out there looking at SASE or looking at getting the benefits of an implementation they may have started already?
Wow, that's a loaded question.
Get it right.
Pressure's on. Guys, there's so many parts and pieces, to that. And, what I found more often than not is, as you've alluded to, the confusion, as if, what is it? And then what immediately backs that up is a lot of times the lack of a needs assessment, a needs analysis, so, if I was to tell
anybody, buy like a product, it's a solution, right?
Put vendor out of your brain, for now. And what you have to be thinking about is, what is it what are my gaps? What am I trying to fulfill? Because I like to communicate a couple things, about SASE. And, one of them is, in my perspective, it's huge bang for the buck in terms of your security program maturity model. And that is, I don't want to say it's easy to implement, but it's fundamentally it's networking and security rules, and you can completely set it up independent. And then when you're ready to light it up, you literally just push an agent out to the computers, and then they connect to it, and it's done. And they're all experiencing the exact same thing at the exact same time. And so the two things is one, the quasi ease of adoption, but also the fact that it's extremely impactful to the maturity model of your security program. When you're able to say that, okay, we can go from nothing to a SASE and go with 100% protected traffic, 24/7, 24/7, 365, always on protection of the riskiest traffic on the network that is literally quite often unprotected. And what traffic is? It's the user traffic. That. I mean, you can sit here and talk about S3 buckets and things like that are open to the internet where you can flush that stuff down. But what you can never put your thumb on completely is the person piece, the people vector. Whatever you can do to raise the level of that security model for that traffic is hugely impactful to an organization. So anyway, I don't know if I don't want to go too far. But those are certainly some of the things that I like to convey, out to people is, it's hugely impactful. Don't overlook the massive benefits to your organization, well beyond simply, a better VPN than the VPN I've got today.
That's right.
It goes so much further than that.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to what JJ's saying. I'll hit a couple points. So, I mean, if you're looking to refresh VPN hardware, I mean, Simone talked about the 4 main use cases that we're seeing. And as more and more technology, or as this technology matures and grows and more feature sets come into this, we expect to see those use cases expand. I was actually talking to JJ earlier about one of our clients who are looking at using this for an IoT security solution where you can run Android OS on those devices, install these types of clients to talk up to the SASE cloud providers and get that security and policy for even headless devices. So, I mean, it's a pretty cool area that we're in right now. We have very well-baked, mature use cases and clients moving it to today, but it continues to mature and we see more and more use cases coming out on a daily basis. So, I mean, think of the infrastructure as a service and SaaS. We think of compute and storage being in the cloud. Think of SASE just being the security and network stack moving to the cloud, just like we saw with traditional data center. So just the evolution, it's where things are going, getting the benefits of the cloud, the resiliency we talked about, and I'll probably go ahead and leave it there and hand it over to Simone.
I love what you both just said, because so one of the things I talk to people about is, I think SASE is doing to network security what cloud has done to computing and storage, or is still doing. It has actually, many analogies to that. One is, of course, like it's trying to change the CapEx model to an OpEx model, more agility. There's a lot of that. But if you look at what you just described, like one analogy is like, first of all, it's not going to be all in and all of a sudden you're not on-prem anymore. It's always going to be a hybrid environment. That's true for clouds, true for SASE, right? Like your network will always have a portion that is on-prem that you need to manage, and you want to make sure you're managing this in a congruent manner. The second thing is, if you were just taking your application and you were just porting them on the cloud the way they are, that rarely works long-term. So the same thing happens with SASE. You're just taking like your point solution. You're just like, okay, I'm going to keep the architecture as it is and just going to stamp SASE on it. It's going to work, but it's not really going to give you the benefits of what SASE can do for you. So my encouragement is always start with, yes, there is a project at hand, but think about what's the network transformation you're trying to drive as a customer and as an enterprise. And then, yes, solve for the short term, but think about also who can help you go through this journey that you are undertaking. So choose the right partner for that journey. And then start taking out and consolidating estate on that. Oftentimes we see the opposite. We start with like, okay, I want to replace X, Y, and Z, so that's why I need SASE. And then you do that, and then you find out it's like, this is still very, very cumbersome. And that's because you need to flip it over its head. If that makes any sense, Jason.
Yeah, definitely.
Perfect. No, I love that. And I think, again, there's a lot of capabilities here. And first of all, it doesn't mean that you don't have to think about any of these things. It's just you can think about them in a more of a transformational way, in a way from operationalizing this thing into something that's easier, because it's never going to be easy. Security is never going to be easy. But there's some things that you can do for your organization to make it easier. But I will always say no product set is going to affect you any more than you from a vision perspective are going to have to change your organization. So there's always a culture aspect. There's always it can't just be the security teams doing it. It's got to be operations. It's got to be security. It's got to be leadership. There's a transformation that takes place in the organization. And again, that's why we feel that people who just buy these kinds of things as a product aren't doing it right. You've got to do it. This is a solution, and this has got to be something that's going to be solve these short term, but also deal with how you take this in your business into what you want to be as a business. This is an enabler if you do it properly. And that's really what we kind of stand for. And I think that's a good place to end. But it's been an absolute pleasure, guys. I had a lot more fun talking about SASE than I thought I was going to have. So you guys are on.
It's because you got SASE.
But thanks for being here. Especially thanks, Simone, for our special guest from Palo Alto. Thank you so much, sir. And for you guys out there, we didn't get a lot of comments this time, but we really appreciate you guys watching and commenting and helping us figure out how we dive into this technology aspect and help deliver to you what you need from a solutions perspective. Thank you so much. If you want to know more about what we do here at Insight, please visit us at solutions.insight.com and visit our folks at Palo Alto as well. Thank you guys and have a great day.
Yeah, thanks all.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.